Now I'm going to do a little work on these CV joints and shafts, half shafts. I want to take them apart and give them a really good cleaning so that I can get ready to install new boots and grease them all up. Um, this is the shaft on the side that had the busted knuckle. I remember that because I remember this plastic wire tie that was used on here to act as a boot clamp, and I remember that this was pulled off when I originally took this apart. And I also remember that this was the side that had the Arctic Cat cap on the end of the wheel, so you could see that this didn't get all rusted. And then when I took the other side apart, that was missing the cap, so this was pretty rusted because it had been exposed for who knows how long. And then I remember initially when I saw this, I was like, wow, that's kind of weird that this has this big nut on this large diameter, and on this side it was if you recall, it was just a castle nut, smaller castle nut. And I first thought that there were two different size shafts, but in fact the size of this area here with the splines that the hubs actually go on are identical on both. The only difference is that this end is beefier, and then this end here. So this is where the diameter changes on these two shafts. Otherwise, they're the same. So not sure if that's by design or whether or not maybe this is a aftermarket shaft. All I know is I want to make sure that I keep all the components for this shaft separate from all the components for this shaft, so that when I take it all apart and I clean everything, when I go to reassemble everything, it'll all go back together the same way as matched parts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this unit out and get these ball bearings and this cage that holds the ball bearings and everything out. And the best way to do that, from what I saw somebody do online on another YouTube video, is basically you can actually stick something in here and pry up just far enough to get a couple of these balls to fall out. And once you get a couple of them out, you can actually, it just gets easier and the whole thing will come out. Okay, after I thought about it, I realized it wasn't prying up on this cage that actually rotates this cage. You actually push down on it. The video that I saw, he had some kind of a brass drift or something, and he just kind of banged on it, gave it a bang this way, and it popped out that way. This one actually did the same thing really easily. I didn't even have to tap it hard. So that pops this up so that you can then get to these ball bearings and pop them out. And after you remove several of these ball bearings, that one's not quite high enough yet. Oh, there we go. After we remove several of these ball bearings, the cage will come up pretty easily. So I'm going to do that now. Alright, I got this out. Got all the balls out by, basically knocking one side down, taking a couple balls out, knocking it the other way. Once you get all the balls out, you can rotate this whole thing about 90 degrees and you can pop this assembly out. And then what I want to make note of here is that this goes in, this has to go in this way. And what's different about it is there's more of a, well, once I get it cleaned up, I'll be able to show it. But there's actually a difference. This looks different from one side to the other. While this inner part's still in there, you can tell the part that goes, which direction it goes in, because there is a groove on this, in this splined area that I've got my finger in right here. And that groove is what this snap ring snaps into when this shaft is pushed in. So what actually holds this spline shaft into that spline part is actually this little clip engages a groove inside there, and obviously the groove is going to be further down on the inside, so the shaft is inserted further. So that's one dead giveaway. But once this is all cleaned up, if this part does come out of this cage, you want to make sure that this goes back into the cage the same way, and you want the cage to actually go into this unit in the correct orientation. So I'm going to clean this all up and then take another look at this. This is what this assembly looks like once it's cleaned up. You can actually see there is a slight bevel on the inside of this edge here, and that's what differentiates one side of this cage assembly to the other side. This side does not have a bevel. This little area is just a little bit wider, and on this side there's a very slight bevel, and this beveled edge seems to correspond with being the side that faces out when this is inserted in to that other half of the assembly there. And that's indicated by the fact that the groove for the snap ring is actually down here on this side, which is actually going to face in. So that's how that appears to go. Unless, of course, somebody rotated this around like that, and then of course it would be backwards. But I was pretty careful to make sure I didn't do that during the cleaning process. But I'll double check it against the way the other one is, just in case. Well, here's the outer half of the CV joint assembly. This is the side that the wheel bearing was in pieces, so this is actually the inner race of the old broken wheel bearing that's still on this assembly, so I've got to remove that. And the way I'm removing this is I start with my this putty knife. It's got a really sharp wedge to it, and I can actually drive that in there, and it actually popped this gap open just enough so I'll be able to now put a screwdriver in there and start prying even further, and I'll be able to pop this right off of here. And then I've already cleaned this up, and so it's going to be ready for reassembly and grease soon. Alright, and once I pry in there with a screwdriver, I can just work this forward and this pops right off. The old bearing piece comes off to be discarded. And now what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to clean up this surface right here, because this is the surface that the inner seal on the wheel knuckle rides on. So I want to clean that up. So I'll use my my soft brass wire wheel. Alright, I cleaned this up on the wire wheel, and this area here that the seal runs on is pretty heavily pitted, but I'm going to reuse this unit anyways because of the high cost of replacement. In a perfect world, if money were no object, I'd want to replace this unit, and then that way that seal would have a really good contact surface. But that being said, I don't plan on really submerging this wheel into swamp water and heavy mud puddles like a lot of people do with these machines. So this might give me good service for a while, even in the condition it's in. Okay, I'm going to work on putting together my my shaft assemblies, just so I can get something done. I'm gonna remove these old bands and the remnants of the boots off of the shaft here. And I'm just gonna use some diagonal cutters to cut out those bands. Alright, this side, once you cut the band off, this side you just pop it off this ridge and slide it off right over the spline shaft. And then the shaft gets thicker over here, so to get this one off, easiest way is to, well, I could just cut it or slide it off this this side of the shaft, which, since the retaining ring's already off of here, I took the retaining ring off of here so that I could bring it with me to the hardware store and try and find a match for the retaining ring that fell off and went missing on the other side. Unfortunately, had no luck finding one because it's a metric size, and none of my local hardware stores have metric. So what I did was I got the closest one in standard sizes, SAE, that I could find, and I'll try it on later to see how it fits. If it's a sloppy fit, then I'm going to have to hold out for the metric one, which I can order online, but I have to order in quantities to get them. Or I can go to my local Napa and they have a kit that has a whole assortment of different sizes. But then again, I'm buying an entire kit for one snap ring, so, or retaining ring. So anyways, try that a little later. But for now, I'm going to take this off of the shaft, and that basically is going to be just a matter of pulling it off the end of this spline shaft, and I just want to make note of the way that it's on there, because there's two ways that can go on, and there's actually a slight bevel on one side. It's kind of hard to see it when it's on there, but when I get it off, I'll make sure I make note of which side is which. Okay, now I've got this off. This slid off in this direction here. So this side actually faces towards the differential or the end of the shaft, and this side actually faces towards the middle of the shaft or out towards the wheel side. And you can actually see on this side, this area right here is wider than it is on this side. Also, if you look at it from the side, there's actually a bevel to it, so a taper to it. So this is actually wider here than it is here. So again, the narrower side with this wider area right here faces out towards the wheel or outbound, and this wider side with this narrower edge here is what faces towards this way, towards the differential, which is also the direction that this shaft is pointing in. And that's how that goes on there. So now I'll be able to slip this right off, and then I'm going to clean this shaft up and clean the splines up. And I'm also going to clean up this assembly here and inspect it. Alright, now I got the shaft all cleaned up, and then after I cleaned it up I realized, oh, I didn't really make note of which end is which, and they almost look identical. The splines on the spline shaft ends on both ends are identical. They'll both slip in here, but there is a difference. If you look real closely on this side, you can actually see this is almost perfectly straight, and then the splines are raised just a little bit above this straight shoulder, and then there's this beveled area back here, of course. But if you look at this side, the shoulder is pretty flat, and then all of a sudden it actually widens out and gets thick right here, and then there's a noticeable groove, and then the splines start. So you don't really see that on this end, but you see it on this end. And this end, where it's thicker right here at the end before the splines start, is the end that goes into the inner CV joint assembly here. How do I know that? Well, luckily I hadn't disassembled the other side yet, so I was able to compare them and see the difference. And that is the difference. So I'll make note of that right now, and then that way when I go to reassemble everything, I'll be sure to make sure that I put it together right. Right now I'm going to pop this assembly apart and get the bearings out, the ball bearings out, so that I can clean it up, get all the grit and grime and dirt and everything out of there, so that when I reassemble it, I can inspect it and also make sure that I have nothing but good clean grease in there. Alright, before I disassemble this for cleaning, I just want to make a quick note as to the relationship that this inner piece goes into this piece. Once this is out, it may very well fit either way going back in, and then I'm going to have problems. So to avoid that, I'm just going to make a note now of how that's in there. So this outer cage facing up with the wider part right here facing up as opposed to that side. With that facing up, this inner part goes in with this little indentation area, or this little recessed area facing up. You can actually just see it there. There's actually a little area that the splines are shallower, as opposed to on this side, the splines pretty much come right out to the end with just a little beveled area. So on this side, there's actually, you can almost see a line in there where the that change takes place. So that side of this inner cage is going to face the same side that has the wider outside edge here. Now I'll disassemble it, which is just a matter of getting this good and sturdy in a vise or a fixture that can hold it, and flexing this all the way over, and then giving it a good stern pop with a nice soft drift, and that will actually pop one side up. Okay, now these parts are all disassembled and cleaned and ready to be reassembled. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to make sure I put this in the right way, and that would be, again, with this wider edge facing up, corresponds to that grooved area there at the top, reason for that, by the way, is so that when it's slid onto the shaft, there will be room for the retaining clip to go in the groove. If this is actually put on the wrong way, then you can't get the retaining clip on. It won't snap into the groove. And then of course, if you put it back in this the wrong way, then that will force this to be on the wrong way, which will give you all kinds of problems. So anyways, again, this wider edge here facing up, and this recessed area in here facing up. So this has to go on like that. And it's just a matter of basically turning it at about 90 degrees and popping it in. Okay, this is all back together now. Just you play around with this thing and you'll get it to drop right in. And then you just pop the bearings in from the side with a, I just give it a light tap on each bearing, each ball with a dead blow mallet, pop them in, and move it around and they'll free up. And then this actually is designed so it could swivel a little bit, and more importantly, these balls should all rotate freely. And of course there's no grease on there now. Once the grease is in there, that'll really make it slip around like it should. And then now you can see that that little grooved edge in there that I was talking about, that's going to face in. And what happens there is when I slide this on, this little area right here is going to actually go into there, and that will cause this to go on to the shaft just far enough to expose this groove so that I can install the retaining clip. Alright, what goes on that groove and holds this on is one of these type of external retaining rings, which of course is installed with these kind of snap ring pliers. And unfortunately this is the original one, one of the original ones. The other original one was missing. At the beginning of this whole thing, you probably remember that this shaft was, the shaft on the other side was completely pulled out and just hanging. So this clip went missing, and we don't have this clip. This is an SAE sized clip that I got at the hardware store. It was the closest one I could find to this one, which is a metric. And unfortunately I just tried installing this on there and it's way too sloppy. It's not going to stay on there securely, so I cannot use this retaining ring. I am going to have to find a metric retaining ring this size. Alright, went to the hardware store and got a 3/4 inch retaining ring, and that's a good fit. So that solves the issue of trying to find the replacement retaining ring for metric retaining ring for this one. It was the one that I got was actually only slightly large, slightly smaller than this original one, but it snaps on well and will be a good fix.